In this video, I really want to talk about one of the biggest questions that a lot of us anglers ask ourselves all the time. Whether you are just getting started in bass fishing or you've been fishing your entire life, this is probably the number one question we all ask ourselves out there on the water, which is, when should I stay and when should I go? I don't think that the answer to this question is actually black and white. There's a lot of like gray areas. And so in this video, what I want to do is kind of just candidly talk about some times that I have had where I may either made that decision too soon, or I made it too late, or I made the right decision, or I made the wrong decision, in hopes that I can really help you kind of with your fishing and learning how to know when is the right time to stay and when is the right time to go. Now, before we get into that, this video is brought to you by Fin Fishing Apparel. And right now I'm running a pretty awesome deal over on the Fin Fishing website for the month of September. If you buy a USA made sun shirt, you can get a duck hat, which is a waterproof hat, very durable, very lightweight. Usually it runs for $36, but if you buy a USA made sun shirt, you can get this for 10 bucks. It's just an extra 10 bucks. So it's kind of a package deal. Altogether, you're looking at 64 bucks, and it's the best way to help support this channel. So I'm gonna leave some links down below in the description. Thank you to all of you who have shopped at Fin Fishing in the past. It makes a huge difference. All right, let's talk a little bit about this question, when to stay and when to go. Like I said, I really don't believe that there is a perfect answer to this, because there's just so many different situations that we face as anglers. Whether that is weather conditions, it's time of the year, fish that are moving versus fish that are staying put. There's so many different little like intricacies and nuances into answering that question. Now, a lot of you guys have heard me talk about the 15-minute rule a lot in the past. And the 15-minute rule means that when you go to a lake and you're trying to locate fish, if I have fished a lake in the past and I kind of know the stretch that those fish really like to live on, maybe it's a stretch I've caught them in the past, or maybe it's like offshore, maybe I know, hey, they always sit on this rock, or they sit along this little ledge, or they sit in this brush pile. This is where the 15-minute rule, I think, is very, very important and something that can really help you, because sometimes I get to a body of water and I'm just trying to see what phase the fish are in. And I know of areas where I've caught them before in the pre-spawn, areas I've caught them in the spawn, post-spawn, summer, in the fall. And so sometimes I will check some of my like high percentage areas, and I might only spend 5 to 10 to 15 minutes at most in that area, hitting the best pieces of cover, hitting the most high percentage areas. And if I'm not catching fish, I'm going to keep on moving on. And I think that that is really important. But with the 15-minute rule, sometimes you have to understand that body of water. Maybe, and so when I say 15-minute rule, I'm really talking about a lot of us fish a lot of lakes out there that we fish a lot. A lot of guys fish the same ponds or the same lakes over and over and over. And so when it comes to a lot of the bass fishing that I do, I would rather be a little bit on the fast-paced side and be able to see a lot more water than be too slow. Because as we know as anglers, bass aren't just everywhere. There's not always going to be bass on that same point throughout the entire year. Now, some lakes, again, depending on where you live in the country, for example, if you go up into the northern part of the country, not saying that those fish aren't here and there like they are down south, but I feel like at times there's a lot higher fish population. Like when I fished up in New York and in Minnesota and Michigan and like up in the northern part of the country, there seems to be a big population of fish that bite pretty quickly. But what you're really trying to find is the major groups of fish. So you can find a grass flat and catch 2 or 3 fish, but that's not there just seems to be a lot more fish everywhere in the north. Where down south, like you can fish a lot of different areas. And I don't know if it has to do with pressure, if it has to do with the water temperature being so warm, whatever it may be. I feel like at times you can fish a long time without catching a bite because you are simply not around them. And once you get around them, then it's completely different. So again, kind of teetering on this line and trying to help you to understand, when to go and when to leave. I will say that one of the first things that I always look for when I get to a new spot is bait fish. Like, unless we are in the spawn of the year, when bass are not fixated on eating bait, pretty much the rest of the year they do like bait fish. They like to have bait nearby. And I'm not saying that you can't catch a bass where there's not bait. But what I have found over the years is that bass will hang around an area even if there's not a ton of bait there, but when bait gets into that area, it signals the dinner bell for them. They go to feeding, they go to eating. And so one thing that I'm always looking for in an area is bait. If I get into an area, say it's a shallow water area, maybe there's some lily pads, maybe there's some grass. If I'm hearing a lot of those bluegill snapping and popping on the surface, that gives me a little bit more ease and a little bit more time to realize like this potentially is a good area. Now, if I get into that same grass mat or that same lily pad field and I'm not seeing any life at all, I'm not seeing birds up on the bank, I'm not hearing those bluegill, then those are the zones where I might make a couple of flips and pitches or something, or cast, because you never know, but I'm not going to give that spot much time. I always typically want to be around bait, because usually when you find bass that are eating, bait is pretty close by. Same thing applies when you're fishing offshore structure. The exact same thing. You may go out there and graph for 5 hours of your day and find 20 different brush piles, but 3 of them had a lot of bait. I might make a cast at all those single brush piles, maybe 2 or 3 casts, 10 minutes or so, and then leave. But if I know there's a lot of bait in the area, I may spend a little more time in that that general zone, because you have some of the right ingredients. So that's really what it goes to. That's one of the biggest things to understanding when I should leave or when I should go is, are the ingredients right? And also, you have to pay attention to timing when it comes to all these fisheries, because timing is a humongous deal when it comes to catching fish and not catching fish. Because I cannot tell you how many times I have gone behind an angler and caught fish, or an angler has gone behind me in the same area and caught them way better. And it all comes down to timing. Now, there's a lot of things that impact timing. One of the biggest things is simply the sun as it moves overhead. As the sun moves in the sky, it is really going to pinpoint fish in certain areas, especially fish that are relating to shade. This is why something that you hear a lot of anglers talk about is like, if they're fishing around docks, I'm not saying you can't catch fish around docks in the morning, but a lot of the best dock fishermen out there are going to say, hey, like that bite's going to start around 10. Why? Because the sun gets overhead. It really makes the shade lines very tight under those docks. It draws the fish in. Where those fish may be feeding outside of the dock in the morning, about 10 o'clock, they're going to move on in. So you could go down a line of docks in the morning and not catch them, and then a guy comes right behind you and catches them. So what I'm trying to say, though, is that when it comes to should I go or should I leave, if you fish down a row of docks, like maybe it's the only row of docks that has fish. Maybe you're preparing for a tournament. And maybe you're like, I have had a lot of tournaments, practices, and this could be a tournament or in fun fishing, where I only find a few areas where I think the fish are. Like, there's obviously fish all over the place, but you can never fish other people's fish the same way that you can fish the fish that you found. So when you get into some of these areas, you may actually end up staying longer because you're trying to wait for the timing to work out. Or sometimes you continue to hit an area because you don't know when the timing is. I'll never forget this tournament I fished a number of years ago here in Ohio on a lake, Delaware Lake, for those of you that fish in Ohio. I had found this one point where the fish were kind of like setting up offshore. Now on Delaware Lake, they don't typically do that unless the water is stable for a long time. And I was fishing this one point, the fish were there, and I had found this area in the day before the tournament. I caught a 3-pounder and like a 1.75-pound fish, which for Delaware Lake, those are like really good fish, like big fish. So of course, the start of the tournament happens. I run right to this point. I start fishing and casting and everything. There's bait in the area. So everything's telling me like it's a go time, but I didn't catch a fish. And I fished through that point in another little section, and I gave myself about 30 minutes, which really was it was too long. But again, it was one of the only places that I knew that had fish. And so what I ended up doing is I ran elsewhere and actually started fishing shallow. That was kind of my backup deal, was just going shallow and fishing. Picked up a few keepers, came back to that spot probably about 10 o'clock. About 10 o'clock, fished through it again, and guess what? Didn't catch a dime. Did not catch anything. I can only tell you how heartbroken that I was. Now, at this time, I realized that when I had caught him there the day before, it was at like 3 o'clock, which the tournament stopped at 3 o'clock. So anyways, I decided, you know what? I'm going to go fish, and I'm going to go fish some new water. And at about 1:30, I'm going to come back here, and we're just going to fish it, and hopefully those fish turn on in the afternoon. So we went and fished some other stuff. Me and the guy that I was fishing with, we ended up catching a limit, but it was a very small limit. We came back to that spot at 1:30, and it was like the floodgates opened. Now, in Ohio, the floodgates opening is a lot different than the Tennessee River lakes when the floodgates open, right? But what I'm trying to say is when we got there, we ended up calling out, I believe, 4 of the 5 fish that we caught. And I caught another 3-pounder. I caught a couple of 2-pounders. Again, big fish for this specific lake. Ended up doing really well in that tournament. I think we didn't win it, but we were like 2nd or 3rd. I can't remember. It was a little while ago. But again, timing is a big deal. Now, I knew that lake fairly well, and I had some other areas I knew I could just run and pick up fish. But if you were an angler who did not know that lake well, it would have been okay for you to sit on that one point that I was talking about all day. Like if you had found this one point and you were like, I want to go there and I'm just going to sit there and wait for them to turn on. You may have picked up some fish here and there, even because just random feeding windows. But if you had sat there all day, eventually you would have been there at 1:30 to 3 o'clock when those fish started biting. And you may have done really well in that tournament as well. And it was you would have had the exact same result that I did, but you would have stayed in the exact same place the entire day. So what I'm trying to say is that sometimes situationally, you don't always have other places to go. But if you know there are a few places where fish are, you know it from the day before, it's okay to sit there and try to figure them out. You know what I'm saying? So that's why it can be a little bit all over the place. That's why it's not always black and white when it comes to when should I stay and when should I go. Now, regardless, even me personally, if I go to a lake that I know nothing about and I fish a general zone for well over an hour, if I don't catch fish, if I don't see bait, I'm at least going to move. Now, if I am there and I do maybe see bass, maybe I have some followers, or maybe I see a lot of bait in the area, or maybe just mentally I'm like, man, this place sets up. It's got really good green, luscious grass, or it's got really good rock cover, or it's got really good this or that. If everything looks right, but I can't catch a fish, that's when I start doing other things and just coming back for 15 minutes. Going back, coming back. Going somewhere else, coming back. And that is sometimes the best way to figure out timing. You know, because we don't always know when that timing is going to be. Now, I will say that most of the time in bass fishing, the best feeding window that there ever is going to be is the morning. And what I have found over the years is the best feeding window is that first 2 hours. Even in the dead of winter, when the water is the coldest that it'll ever be, the first couple of hours around the sun coming up are always the best. There's another really good time in the evening, right before the sun goes down. Now, when you're out there on the water, you can have days where you catch them all day. But what I've seen a lot of times is between about 9 o'clock and noon to 1, there's almost always some sort of lull in the day. And if you think about it, bass a lot of times are going to be, I fish tournaments on one lake. I fish tournaments on a lot of lakes. I fish tournaments on this one lake a lot though. And I will tell you that morning fish behave a lot differently than afternoon fish. The place where I catch them in the evening, in the afternoon, and the night tournaments is vastly different than where I catch them in the morning tournaments or the like all day tournaments at times. And so bass are going to set up in some areas and move to other areas as that sun is going over the head. Again, not always. This is why bass fishing is the way that it is. Because sometimes you'll go out there on lakes. You know, I've been on, for example, I've fished on the Tennessee River lakes where you will have these massive schools of fish and they're there all day and they're there for a month. Now, still, you have to figure out how to trigger these fish to bite. And that can be difficult. Let's actually talk about that real quick because something that I have seen a lot, and this is maybe a little bit more for the advanced angler and the angler that fishes offshore a lot. I think that most anglers who have done that will agree that the first cast on a lot of these offshore schools is typically your best cast. And what I mean by that is your first cast is the one that you are most likely to hook up with a fish. If you know right where a school of bass is, and you pull up to that fish, that area, and whether you use live scope or you're not using live scope, if you know where the fish are, maybe by a waypoint without live scope, or you're panning around and you see them with a live scope, that first cast is pivotal. Pivotal. I don't know the word I'm trying to say. Pivotable? I don't know why I can't say that. Leave it down below in the comments. That first cast, though, is super important. And so making sure that you're lined up. I personally like to make sure that I'm a certain distance away from the fish. I feel that if I can be like 80 to 100 feet away, it is a big deal. So a lot of times, like back in the day before I had any kind of forward-facing sonar on my boat, I would always mark schools with a waypoint. When I started to approach them, I would click on that waypoint, and as I got within about 100 feet, because if you click on the waypoint, it will tell you how close you are. And so once you get close, it'll tell you you're 80, 100 feet away, whatever it be. Right about 80 feet, I would stop, and that's when I would make my cast. To this day, even though I have forward-facing sonar on the boat, I still do the exact same thing, but I might use the forward-facing sonar to line me up. So it's the same thing, you're just a little bit more efficient. But I like to get a long ways away from that fish, make that cast, make sure that I'm throwing the bait, to me, that has the best hookup to land ratio. This is one of the things that I've learned a lot over the years is that if you think you can trigger them on a bait that has a great hookup to land ratio, which is typically a single hooked bait, throw that one in there first, because the worst thing that you can do, which will kill everything and not make you not understand when to go and when to leave, is when you hook into a fish and you lose that first fish. Because when you lose that first fish, a lot of times he's going to go down and he's going to more or less tell his buddies. He doesn't tell his buddies. But there's something that happens underwater, which I have seen on hundreds of lakes at this point. Maybe not hundreds of lakes. I've seen it on a lot of lakes, probably hundreds of times on different lakes, where when you might catch 3 or 4 fish in a row, and if you lose one, that school is done. They are done. They are finished. And I don't know exactly what it is besides, bass, fish in general are going to release some stress hormones and probably something in the water. And when you catch them and they go back and the fish smell that, they know danger is close by. And so they stop feeding. So I always like to make that first cast with something that I know I am going to hook them and hold them and get them in the boat. Now, a lot of times, especially these days, you have to change up baits a lot in order to continue to catch fish in those areas. I feel like unless you're dealing with a lot of current-oriented fish, it is hard at times to just sit there and make the same cast with the same bait anymore and continue catching fish, especially on lakes that are clear, because clear water lakes, those fish follow each other, and as soon as you hook one, they will all follow the other ones, and then they go right below your trolling motor. So I kind of got off the timing thing there. Now I'm just kind of talking. But anyways, guys, I just wanted you guys to know that it's not always super black and white when it comes to timing out there on the water. But when you get to an area, if you have the right ingredients, give yourself a little bit more time to maybe find that one little hot spot. But again, if they're not biting and you've thrown a number of different baits, even if you see them, go away, come back. Maybe you just have your timing off. All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed this video. I will see you guys tomorrow.